All right, so today is June 1st, the first day of June, as year seems to be racing by. So today's topic is going to be covering CSV files, so comma separated value files. So kind of backing up a step, generally applications will need to store data, and we usually use databases for them. CSVs are kind of like a halfway solution. Doesn't mean that they're totally irrelevant. I would say, depending on what industry you go to or who you're dealing with, a lot of people still use Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets that translate into comma separated values. So not everyone is using databases out there. Databases generally are the preferred way just because they're easier to query database and organize data more effectively. But again, CSV files, you will probably encounter them in a few places. So definitely not irrelevant information that we're going to be going over. So yeah, so for now, we're not going to be dealing with databases. We're just going to be dealing with CSV files, how to basically access data that's stored inside of a file and how to write out to it so that we could do a little more exciting things with our coding challenges or applications that we're developing. So yeah, let's kind of just follow along on the curriculum page. We'll go through a couple examples, and then again, hopefully shouldn't be too strenuous of a topic to kind of understand. All right, so we talk about a database briefly here, just kind of understanding how a database table might look like. Again, a CSV file kind of reflects a database table. You will have values in rows, and each row represents a record. So here we have, I guess, sample data for NFL teams. Looks like the Bears didn't have a great season, or was halfway through season. I'm not sure why the Jets have played 2 fewer games than the Patriots and Bears at this point. Who knows what's going on with this actual data. But CSV files will be organized into, again, values, and then you might have a header file or a header line. All right, so in this case, if we grab this data, I'm just going to copy this. So we have a team ID, a team name, number of wins, number of losses. Again, this is reflecting the data we kind of see in this table here. So I'm just going to copy that, and let's get to my coding window. All right, so this was our class example. We don't need these files anymore. Let me create a new file. Let's call it, I don't know, data.py. Not sure if that's a great name. And then just to organize this a little better, let's say classes, move all this stuff in there, and then we'll have a data folder. All right, so I have data.py. This will be my main file for reading in data, but we also need data to work with. So here I'm going to create a new data folder. Inside that, I'm going to create a new CSV file. So for that, I'll name it nfl.csv. So the file extension, again, CSV. So we know this is a comma separated value file. So here we go. Looks like I didn't catch the headers. All right, so nothing too complicated going on here. Again, just a pretty trivial file, each value separated by a comma. So when we parse this out, we should be able to get these values appropriately. All right, so I'm going to save that. And let's actually just go about reading this data in. So the first thing I'm going to need is a CSV module. Again, so the good thing about Python is a lot of these modules are kind of built in, so you don't need to install like third-party libraries or modules. So CSV is a common enough, I guess, data type that we deal with. So Python kind of includes it for us, which is kind of nice. All right, so now that we have this module, we can kind of use it. So I'm going to use, let's go with like normal way of creating something. So I'll do a open, and then I need a file name. So my file is nested within the data folder. So I'm going to do data nfl.csv. This is going to open a file for me. So I'm going to store that inside of a file. So let's say NFL file object equals whatever the open method returns to me. Then I want to read what's in the NFL file. So I can do a for loop, or actually I need to create a reader. So say reader equals CSV. And I want to read my NFL file. So hypothetically, let's kind of just back up one step. Let's say we didn't want to use the CSV module. We can still read the file. So if I didn't want to use the CSV module, I could do NFL file.read. All right, so there's this read lines function that will read all the lines in my info file, and then I could, let's say I want to print them out, and let's see what we get. So bring up my terminal here. Let's run, let me get into my folder to create one, CSV data, Python data.py. Okay, notice I get this output. It looks like there's new lines being added in addition to the new line for each file or each line. So getting 2 new lines here, which is probably not what I want. What else? Let's see, new lines. Yep, so notice we get all the values out. So the first row is just the header, then each team file, team record. We could, again, manually parse this line. So if you guys are familiar with the split method, there's a line split. This will throw it into an array or a list, I guess, in Python. I always confuse those terms. So let's just say line data. So split will actually split my string up based on this delimiter. So in this case, I want to split up on each comma. So if I print out line data, so like using L because it looks too closely to 1. So let's just call it X. All right, so in this case, we're going to split it manually and then print out our line data. So I do that. All right, notice I get each individual, I guess, item. So I get ID, team, wins, losses on new lines. I get the ID. Again, so I do have the possibility to extract each individual data that I want from my CSV file without using the CSV module. However, it's much more easier to use the CSV module because where we know that commas are going to be a delimiter, so that's what CSV kind of just automatically assumes. So if I want to use my CSV module, instead of doing this, let's say this is the manual way to read any file. So again, this doesn't have to be a CSV file. You can basically open up any text file, anything that has textual data in it. You can just open that up and read the lines as such. But if you want to use our CSV module, it becomes slightly easier. So if I do similar thing, I guess I could write over that file. Now we create a reader object off the CSV module. So that's going to be reader, pass it our file name. Okay, so now we get this reader object. So this reader object lets us read each line. So I could do for line in reader. All right, let me comment this stuff out. All right, so it's slightly easier to use this reader object. So we'll still view the same output as we were getting before, but now we have it nested inside of a list. So I guess that's something, instead of printing out each line, I could have done print line data. So this would achieve the same thing. The only thing we don't have to do ourselves is the split here. The CSV reader will do that for us automatically. Now, one thing about the approach I've taken, I've opened the file on line 10. I guess I also opened it up here. You always want to close the resource when you're done using it. So you're going to have to call NFL file.close. So this will actually close the file so it's not in a read state. Because if you have it open, it's going to lock the file. So then theoretically, you can't delete it if something is still trying to read from it. So always remember to close your files if you open them. And usually best to close them as soon as possible. So in this case, once I've got the reader, I should be able to close it. I guess, nope, I need to read it first. All right, so I need to close my file after I'm done using the reader because the reader object is still using that file. All right, so again, pretty simple to read data out of a CSV file. Hopefully everyone's with me so far. But if you look at the curriculum page, there's a bit of different syntax here. We have this kind of strange looking syntax that we've not covered before, like this with as. That's just slightly more preferred. So using CSV module, instead of doing something like this, you could change this to be with open and give it an alias. So in this case, info file will be our alias. The reason this is preferred is because you don't need to manually close the file. Once we exit this with block, the file will automatically close for you. So you don't have to remember that. You kind of just put that out of your mind. The syntax will automatically handle closing the file for you. So in this case, we still open up a file, put it into NFL file, have our CSV reader, and again, we have access to all the data now inside of a list. So if I want to extract out, let's say, just the team name, I could do something like line 1. So this is going to be the first element. All right, so there I get the team, all the team names. Any questions about any of this? All right, if we go back to our curriculum page, kind of scroll through, there are modes you can open your file in. So by default, you can read the file. So I notice I did not pass in any second parameter. And that's something I'm not sure if we've talked about with our discussion of Python or even JavaScript. So maybe I could take a quick segue here. But I did not pass in a parameter here, and it was fine. The question is, why was this fine? So let me take a quick detour. Have we covered default parameters?
Not yet.
We
Okay.
haven't.
Cool. Glad that we can cover it now then. So let me create a quick new file. Let's call it default params.py. All right, so this is kind of a segue or a tangent. So it's not directly related to CSV files, but I think important topic for us to cover. So, okay, so default params, what are they? So let's say I create a function. Define, let's call it, let's give it a name. Let's say donuts. Donuts will take in flavor and let's say base. So like base of a donut can be like a cake donut or a yeast donut or an old-fashioned donut. I'm not sure what the proper term for that is. If there's a chef out there and he has a better term, let me know. So donut will have a flavor and a base. Put a pass in there. Likewise, we do something similar with methods and classes. So we talked about classes earlier. So if I want to create a donut class instead, I can do that also. That's probably a better example since we just talked about classes. So I'm going to define an init method. Again, this is my constructor. Always remember the self. It's easy to forget those. I sometimes forget them myself. So we pass in a flavor and a base. Let's give some definition here. So self.flavor will equal flavor. And self.base equals base. All right, so again, functions, similar. We have methods inside of a class. Those are functions also. But now we want to do something. So let's say I want to print out the flavor here and the base. And in this case, I'll do str method, self. And again, if I've lost anyone, please ask questions. I want to make sure we understand functions and classes. So in this case, I just want to print out self.flavor and self.base.
Encore, I just had a quick question. Just to make this a little less confusing myself, this donut class we're initiating, could we reference that to kind of like the NFL kind of thing that we have going on already?
Absolutely. I like that idea. So let's do, let's call it NFL or NFL team maybe. Okay, so let's look at that. Okay. So we have NFL team as a function or as a class. So the main thing I'm trying to, I guess they can't have flavors. So we'll have name and
City.
what was that?
It's like a name and city, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to just go with wins. Let's keep that there. Appreciate the suggestion though. So we're just going to keep track of name and the wins that the team has. Do the same here. name wins. Change here. Oops. I want names to map to name, wins and wins. Sorry, I always think I have donuts on my mind, so that's why I always default to donuts, but NFL teams definitely makes more sense. All right, so team self.team. Okay, so again, function or class, I'm just gonna do it with both, but this is where we talk about default parameters. So let's say I want to invoke my NFL team function. Let's just talk about the function right now. I could call my function and pass it, let's say it's both the Bears, and let's say the Bears have 4 wins in the season. All right, so this is simply just gonna print out the Bears with 4 wins.
Is that self.name in the last line?
Oh, yes, thank you. Good catch. I'm just gonna copy this, make it easier.
Shouldn't you just need to print self
Right here,
on line 3?
print self. So no, this is a function. You're saying I could just put in self right here?
I'm just saying to try to invoke the string method of the class.
Oh, sorry, I'm not using the class right now. I'm just calling the function. So sorry to confuse anyone. So I'm just gonna call my function right now. So, okay, so I'm calling my function, right? I'm passing in a value of Bears and a wins value of 4. So this should not have self in it. Okay, so let me just run this and let's see what it gets output. So sandbox, Python, default params. All right, so the Bears have 4 wins. 4, what did I miss here? Oh, I messed that up. All right. Have 4. Okay, sorry for poor English there. Bears have 4 wins this season. All right, so that's not a great season, assuming we're complete with the season, but if we're only in week 4, that's a pretty good record for the Bears. So now the question is, what if I leave off this 4? What's going to happen? So I give this a run. As we talked about with Python, it's a little different in JavaScript, but in Python, you have to match the required parameter. So in JavaScript, they'll be like, okay, you didn't pass me a value for wins. That's going to be undefined, but I'm going to keep continuing my execution. In Python, you must provide values for parameters if those parameters are specified in your function or, again, in your class methods. So in this case, I was unable to successfully call my function. So notice my error says missing 1 required positional argument wins. Now I'm going to hop back to our previous example just to kind of highlight why I got on this tangent. In this case, I didn't specify this R value. I just specified my file name without saying which mode I wanted. And this totally worked fine. Question is, why does that work fine? So the reason is there's an idea of default parameter values that you can design your functions or your class methods with. So in this case, let's say if I want this parameter to be optional, as in the caller should not have to pass it in, I can give a default value to any parameter that I want. So in this case, let's say the default parameter value will be 0. So if we're just creating, passing it a value of Bears, wins will default to 0 unless we specify otherwise. And this will allow me to use this function with only 1 parameter that I'm passing in. So what this change is saying is if a parameter has not been specified by the caller, default the wins parameter to 0. So if I run this now, it should work. Notice I get the Bears have 0 wins this season. Again, that's because we have a default value for this parameter. I could pass in a value still. Let's say I want to say we had a really good season for the Bears, 14 wins. Right now, so notice it says 14 because since I specified a value, it overwrites the default value here. Okay, and you can have multiple default values. So if I want to do losses equal 0, I can do that also. So let's add that into here, losses So if I do this, they have 14 wins and 0 losses this season. Again, so losses is still taking a default value, but wins, since we specified it, takes the value we pass it. The only, I guess, not even a caveat, but just the rule for defining default parameters is that they must come last in your list of parameters. So what I mean by that is I can't do something like name equals team and then have wins be a required parameter. Since I have a default parameter here, everything after it must have a default parameter also. Otherwise, it, like when I pass it a value, it's not going to know, like if I just pass it 14, Python has no way of knowing, the way I have it written right now, that 14 maps to wins instead of mapping to name. So that's where the ordering of your parameters kind of matters there. Okay, so again, if you want default parameters in your function, they must be the last in your list. So if I did want name, sorry for deleting that. If I did want name to have a default value, I need to swap the order so that wins is first, and then names can be second. I mean, you can have multiple parameters here, so I could say, you know, location can be a required parameter, so I could do 14 and say Chicago, even though I haven't specified a team name, and that works because the first 2 values are required, and then the second 2 are optional since I've given them values already.
So is there a way that I can, in my call, skip the 3rd parameter and provide the 4th?
Yes, very good question. Yeah, that will tie back into our lecture, but there's something called QARGs, or keyword arguments. So in that case, Python allows you to do something like this. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit just because I want my name not to be optional. So let's say we have name, location. Name and location are required, and then wins and losses can be optional. Okay, so this is valid syntax. I want to make sure my parameters. So we have Bears play in Chicago. And then I don't want to pass anything else. So if I run this, I get the Bears have 0 wins and 0 losses. Let's say I want to specify losses, but wins I want to keep at 0. So that's what Don was asking. You can do that. To kind of skip it, you specify the exact value that you want updated. So in this case, I'll say losses equal, let's say they went 0-16 for a season. So I could specify the name of the parameter I want to target. So in this case, I have losses here. So my caller will actually match that name here and pass it the value. So in this case, you can say losses, that parameter is going to be 16. So this, in effect, we skipped the wins. And you can put this actually, so let's just run this. All right, so we get 16 losses. We actually put this first in our call. Oops, deleted too much. So
Kind of violates the whole concept of abstraction, but it works, huh?
Yeah, I guess in this case, yeah, you need to know what parameter names are in that case. So I even put this first, and that should work, though it's highlighting it as an error. So I guess I can't do that. So either you got to use QARGs. So I got to go name equals if I want to switch up the order. We're going to talk about QARGs a little bit more here, but if you specify 1, I guess you got to pass all the others after it. So it's kind of like, again, default parameters. If you start using 1 QARG value, you got to use QARGs for the rest of it.
So ordering does, in a sense, matter to some extent?
Yes, ordering here matters. If you don't specify which value you're targeting, Python's going to automatically map it in order. So it's going to map Bears to name, Chicago to location. But if you want to mess with that order for whatever reason, you do have the option for it, but you just need to specify all those values. So in this case, I want to skip over 3. So I'm going to specify losses equals 16. So these are positional arguments, and then these are keyword arguments. And we're going to talk about that more. So if you guys are still kind of lost on that, well, go for it. Do you have a question, Kyle?
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. At the top, I believe I saw like on a previous kind of lecture where Tom kind of like, let's say for instance, I know that wins is pertaining to number for that specific NFL team. I think I saw in a previous lecture where he set it as wins like equals none. Would that apply to this in any way as well?
None?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so none is usually you want to use that keyword when you don't have a value and you want to specify that it actually doesn't have a value. So again, Python doesn't have a concept of undefined. So you got to tell it something. But let's say, yeah, I don't want to create a mistake, as in like, I don't want 0 to be a default value because 0 is like a valid value, but I don't want necessarily to be the default value. I'm not sure if I said that the best, but yeah, I can make these none, and that's fine. So if I do this, I would get none wins. So that would kind of point to me that I have an error here. Either I need to make this a valid value or pass it in. But yeah, none, again, is a valid value you can assign to any variable that you create. Okay, so the same thing goes for classes. That's kind of why I created a class down here. Let's say, again, same thing. You could do default value here. So when I create this NFL team, I could just do team equals NFL team and just pass it Bears. Okay, so that's what's going on with our CSV reader, which we'll get to. So here, notice I'm passing only Bears, which is the name. But that's fine because I have a default value for wins. I guess 10 is probably not a great value for default, but I totally can have 10. So if I want to print out this team, I just do print team. And since I have a str method, I can run that. So let me get rid of this. Okay, let's give this a quick spin. All right, there we go. The Bears have 10 wins this season. Again, I passed one parameter because the second parameter has a default value. You could have as many default parameters as you want. The one note I'll add in there is that can kind of make your code a little less safe because me as a user of this class, I don't know what value is being inserted here. So I kind of got to rely on the default value is going to be something sensible. But I'm kind of just assuming that, I'm not, it's better to specify if you can. I guess is the moral of the story. Default values can get you in trouble. So try not abusing them unless it makes sense to have a default value. So usually when something's optional, that's when a default value makes sense. Don't just try to automatically insert, blank here, because then your call will be like, all right, I don't know how to specify a team name, and now you're just getting some weird values because a blank team name doesn't really make sense. All right, so hopping back to our CSV example, I was mentioning how I did not pass a value here, and that was okay. The reason being is because this open method has a default value here. It's going to be read. If we want to prove that, we actually control click on it. So I'm going to control click on open, go to definition, which is the first menu item. That's going to open up the Python module. Actually, I was hoping it would open up the file. So let's try that again. All right, it's going to nest it in here. But if I scroll down in this nested thing, let's try to parse this file. So there's a bunch of opens. I've actually not looked at this file before. Okay, maybe I'll kind of give a bonus. But at some point, there's some default value that's being used, so I don't have to specify it. Sorry, yeah, there's a bunch of open methods, so sorry, a little unfamiliar territory here. Anyway, just take my word for it. This is an optional parameter. If I don't specify it, somewhere behind the scenes, there's a default value being inserted. In that case, the default value is read or R, so that I can read a file without specifying it. Usually, it's good to be explicit, so I should probably, write read here. So anyone reading this code that's not familiar with the open method can still see, okay, you're passing a value. Let me figure out what that parameter is doing. So again, it's a little more clear. Even if I don't know how to pass it in, usually good practice, pass it in if you can. So in this case, it's clear to anyone reading this that I'm actually reading this file. If you go back to our page here, there's different modes here. So you could do W for writing, as in you're not going to read from the file, but you want to write to it. Appending, so if you have data that already exists in your file and you want to just add on to it, writing will overwrite it. So if you add new data, it'll wipe out what you had existing before. Appending will let you add on to it. All right, so different modes for what you're trying to do. So we talked about reading. This is using the CSV module, but there's something a little more handy that we can use called a dictionary reader. So usually you want to use the dictionary reader when you have like a header and you have key value pairs you want to generate. So in this case, instead of using reader from CSV, I'm going to use dictionary reader. It's called dictionary reader, pass the file. All right, so I'm going to run both of these. One is just using a simple reader object from the CSV module, others using a dictionary reader. And let's see what differences we get. That is not the file I want to run. I'm in CSV data dot hide key error. All right, something went wrong. Let's try to figure it out. So we have, okay. So line 25 had an error on it. Again, good to kind of read errors. So line 25, I was indexing my dictionary, which you can't do. All right, there we go. So in this case, let me delete that. Sorry, I'm gonna try one more time. All right, so the first 4 lines are from my first reader, which is the CSV module using the reader. Second one is using dictionary reader. And usually dictionary reader is going to be more beneficial or better for you. And we'll talk about why, especially when we're working with classes. But first case, I just get each row kind of written out. Dictionary reader is a bit smarter. It's going to assume that your first record is your header. And it's going to use those as your key values. So notice in my 3 lines output here, each of those lines has the key values and then the value from each row. So ID is the key for the first entry in my dictionary, and then value is 1 from the first row. Then I have team Patriots and so forth. And then the second line does the same thing with the header. So that's usually, again, the way you want to represent your data, rather than kind of just relying on, okay, I know that item 1 is going to be my team. That's a little less reliable versus if I do line.team, this is much more, I guess, line team. That's more descriptive. I know that this value is going to output the team. So I get the same output, but I would argue that this is easier to understand than line square brackets 1. Okay, well, I'm not quite sure what's going to output until it outputs it. Any questions about reading a file?
I kind of have a question, and it may be, I mean, I may be totally off regarding that first CSV module that you had right above the dict reader.
Mhm.
If we're looking at like the output like that actually comes to the console, right? Like I know it's a list, but like when it's outputting, should it technically have like the curly brackets around it and then the list within? Like, is that kind of like a visual? Like, would it be considered like an object, a list within an object itself?
So again, keep in mind, we're in Python here, so there's no objects. So objects, we have dictionaries in Python, but no, for the reader here, it's creating just a list. There's no objects involved here. So if you want to just print both those out, just again, compare them. Clear my terminal. Yep, so we get each row gives us a list, and that list contained each, I guess, element separated by that we got from the comma. So if you look at our original file, each value is separated by a comma. So each of those values are put into the list for the row. So ID and then team and then wins. So yeah, you get a list from your normal reader, but dictionary reader, as the name would imply, will give you a dictionary back, which makes it a little easier to, again, just pair up key value pairs. Rather than here, you got to know, like, if you're looking at bears, you got to go back up to the first record and say, okay, bears is referencing a team value because that's what the header has.
My fault. Thank you.
No, you're good. You're good. Always welcome questions. So question is, all right, so we have dictionaries. Why are dictionaries kind of better to use? One, I just think key value pairs are easier to kind of parse. But then if we get into discussion of quarks, so is that somewhere on this page? Should be somewhere here, but anyway, I'm just going to continue coding here. So this goes back to our discussion of, we've sort of brought up in our default params discussion, where we can do something like we're doing here. This is called a keyword argument, also short form quargs, a little weird word. So we have args and we have quargs. So args stands for positional arguments. And then we have quargs, which stands for key word arguments. All right. So there's two ways you can pass values to a function: args and quargs. These two, Bears and Chicago, are example of positional arguments. So args. Keyword arguments, again, you actually specify the parameter you're targeting. That is why it's a keyword, also known as quargs. So quargs are beneficial when you especially when you have a function that takes in a lot of parameters. So let's actually create an object for our NFL team data here. I might have already created my default params, but I'm going to create a new file here. So let's call it NFL team.py. And we're going to create a class here. So it's more class practice. I'm going to call it class NFL team. It's going to look pretty similar to what we had before. Self, always remember that self. And then we have a name. What else do we have? I guess we have ID. We have team name. We have wins, and we have losses. Okay. And then we're just going to map these to instance attributes, because again, each team is going to have a unique name, unique ID. Wins and losses are special to each team. They're not shared across multiple teams. So I'll do a self.id equals ID. And self.losses. I'm going to be lazy here and copy over my str method that I had here. Okay, so I have a simple class here, just takes in some parameters, and then I have an str method. Nothing much going on here. Obviously, we'd add more functionality as needed. Maybe taking a small tangent. So if I did create a NFL team instance, let's do it in our data file. Let's, what do you want to do here? I want to try to just think about how much I want to introduce here. All right, we're going to go for it. So one thing we did not talk about with classes, and I'm going to introduce here, so I guess this is diving back into class discussion. We talked about instance attributes, we talked about instance methods, and we talked about class attributes. The one thing we did not talk about are class methods. All right, so let's introduce class methods to kind of round out that square. So let's say load all teams. Okay, so this is going to be a special method that is not acting on one particular instance. It's going to apply, it's just like a general method for NFL team, the class, not an instance. So to do that, I need to add a decorator. And again, this new terminology, hopefully you guys can bear with me for now. So there's a decorator called class method. This is going to specify that this particular function or this method is a class method, not an instance method. All right, so you just be aware you got to add this decorator. Again, we'll talk about decorators at some other time. Just understand that this is kind of tagging this function as a class method instead of an instance method. All right, so what this is going to do for us is load all of our CSV data into classes, I guess. So how do I want to do this?
Does a class method just mark something as like, would that mean it's not inherited if you use that template? Or what is the point of marking it as a class method?
Good question. I'll get into that. If I don't answer it, please ask your question again. But yeah, so class method. So let's go back to our dog example. So when we had a dog, we had class attributes. So this is species and legs and is a mammal. Those are species attributes because they're shared between all dogs. Instance attributes exist when you have special properties for each individual dog. Then you have instance methods, which kind of use instance attributes. They may do the same thing for all dogs, but they're using individual values. Class methods don't care about instance attributes. They're just like a generic thing that the NFL team concept cares about. So again, let me code this up, and then if there's any confusion, which I'm sure there will be, because I'll probably not explain this as ideally as I want to, but I'm creating a load all teams method, and that's going to contain basically what I created here. So I'm going to copy this, throw this in here. I'm going to need my CSV module, and then I want to return a dictionary. So let's just say NFL teams. So I guess that's going to be my NFL teams. So NFL teams. Okay, so I'm just creating a dictionary. I'm going to return it. So this class method is returning a dictionary. It's not actually using this CLS method, which is fine. Okay, so the whole purpose of doing this was I'm trying to nest functionality so that I can hide it from my caller. So if I want to use this, let me delete all this stuff out of here. I'm going to import NFL from NFL team. Import NFL team. Seems not to like that, but we'll see. And then here I'm just going to do data equals NFL team, read all teams. Seems like my naming's off, load all teams. Okay, let's give this a run. It seems like VS Code saying I have some error, but I will.
I think it's supposed to be lowercase n from the import. I think it's lowercase n.
Here, wait.
Yes, on line 2 on the second import, I think you put it as a lowercase n instead of uppercase.
No, I think I had uppercase here.
Okay.
All right, sometimes VS Code lies to me, so I'm going to assume that we're fine, but let's run it and see what happens. No module, default params. There. What's going on? All right, I think it's gonna work. Third time's a charm, right?
Always.
All right, so I got some dictionary reader object. That's not what I wanted. So let's clean that up. So this returns dictionary reader. So I want to do for so how do I append to this? Equals. That'll work. All right. Always go to Google when in doubt. So add to dictionary from reader. I'm trying to add a dictionary to a dictionary, which is basically appending, and I don't remember how to do that. Ooh, Stack Overflow. It's always good. Do it that way. It's not the way I want to do it, but I see. Okay, this should be a list. And that should be depends. And this should be one. All right, I think that's what I want. So lines can be a dictionary. I want a collection or a list of dictionaries. Apologies for that.
Line 13, shouldn't that be NFL team with an S?
Yes, absolutely. Good catch. All right. Default params, why does this keep coming back here? I'm gonna delete this file. Sometimes VS Code is difficult. It tries to assume what you're trying to import. Okay, so there we go. I got a bunch of dictionaries. Kind of hard to read here, but I have all my data here. I have the Bears, I have the Jets, and the Patriots. Maybe if I want to print this out a little more elegantly, I'll do it for X in data. Print X. And then let's talk about what we did. Okay, so there, I'm getting my data. Looks similar to what we had before with the dictionary reader. Question is, why did I choose to create this method in the first place? And why is it a class method? So answering question one, this is the idea of an kind of abstraction or abstraction where I just provide a method. So now anyone that's using my NFL team class doesn't have to know how to load the data. That's kind of hidden away. So NFL team, since this is dealing with NFL team data, it makes sense just design-wise to kind of have this be a member of NFL team. Again, this has nothing to do with any particular instance. It's actually just reading data, and then we can create instances for it. So I'm going to add one more step here. But again, I'm trying to nesting the logic inside sensible spots. So since we're getting NFL team data from our file, it makes sense to me to have this method exist within my NFL team class instead of just sitting out by itself. I could totally remove this method and just add it as a method here, right? This has nothing necessarily in particular to do with NFL team, the class that I created. So this can just be a function. I could call this function like such, and this would do exactly the same thing if I have my CSV import here. Nope, that's not what I want. Okay, so I could totally just have this be a standalone function, and it works exactly the same as I would want it. To prove it, let's just run it. Okay, same output. So the question is, why did I choose to put this inside my NFL team class? Again, it's a design decision. It does the same thing, but the reason is, for my purposes, it makes sense to have the loading information as a part of the NFL team class. And we're gonna do one more step that hopefully make that more clear, and if not, definitely we'll take time for questions. So I have that method, so I don't need that. But as I said, this is kind of abstracted away. So all I need is this NFL team class. And notice I'm calling the class here. I'm not calling a particular instance. So that is another highlight of class methods. So I'm not creating a team like such. Team equals NFL team. Let's give it a name. Let's go with the Lions. I'm from Michigan. They usually have bad seasons. So let's say have 2 wins. That's not what my class accepts. ID, name, win. All right, so we'll do, let's be ID number 4. There are 2 wins and 14 losses. All right, so notice I'm creating a team instance here. Let's call it the Lions. But I'm not calling it a method on the Lions. I'm calling it on my actual class, which is called NFL team, because this is a class level attribute. Versus if I had an instance method, so let's just create one, get wins, or get win percentage, and this can just return self.wins. I think 16 games in a season, so maybe that's something I would have a class level attribute. Total games, 16 per season, so I could use that here. Okay, so I have a method called get win percentage. This is only accessible when you have an instance, right? Because only a particular team can have a win percentage. A theoretical NFL team is not going to have a win percentage. So in that case, I would call lions.getWin win percentage. And this would, again, call a method on this particular instance. I am not doing that here. I'm calling a method on the class itself because it's a class method. All right, so I'm calling load all teams. That's going to give me some data back, and I can print that data out. All right, the one more step I'm going to go, and then definitely we'll pause for questions, is instead of returning a dictionary, it would be better if I returned an NFL team object. And this is where we go back to quargs. So there's a magic operator, which I tried using before, this double star operator. What this double star operator will actually do is break down a dictionary into key value pairs. So let's just see that in action. Let me create a new file. Let's say quargs. All right, I'm going to quickly create a dictionary. So let's say my dictionary, let's put some random values in it. Donuts, yummy, and green beans, which I do not like, gross. Okay, so this is a very simple dictionary. I can print out my dictionary, or I could print out key value pairs from my dictionary.
So we get extra points Friday if we use donuts.
I will say no. So sandbox, Python, call this quargs. Donuts. All right, what went wrong here? Donuts, the invalid keyword argument for print. Okay, fine. Okay. So how do I highlight this? So this is, again, breaking down a dictionary into key value pairs so that donuts, all right, so let's create a function then. This will be donuts, and this will be all right, so I think I'm kind of going a little all over the place here, but so this operator, again, is going to break it down so that my dictionary is going to be donuts equal yummy, and then also green beans equal gross. All right, that's what this operator is doing. So if I actually want to call my function, I could call my function with that operator. So what is it? My dictionary. There's two ways to call my function here. I could do my function and do my dictionary donuts and my dictionary green beans. All right, you guys still with me, or did I lose everyone entirely? So I have my dictionary here that has two values. I can access those values directly, as in I could call donuts to get the value for donuts, and then call green beans, get the value for green beans. That's going to be passed as parameters here, and then I'll print that out. Or I could use this operator, which notice I don't have to specify my value. So theoretically, if this had like 20 entries in it, I could just do one spread operator like this instead of calling each individual item. So if I clear this, notice I get the same output. I get yummy and gross. So the first example is an example of positional arguments, which we kind of touched on before. The second example is an example of keyword arguments. So this, again, this operator is breaking down my dictionary into individual key and value pairs so that effectively this is the same thing, just easier to type, as if I were doing donuts equal yummy and green beans equal gross. All right, line 12 and line 13 are essentially identical. It's just this is a faster way to do exactly what I'm doing on line 13. And this works with dictionaries. So if I have a dictionary, I don't have to manually extract the values. I can just break it apart. So again, as we talked about with keyword arguments, the ordering does not matter. So hypothetically, if I swapped these two, I had green beans first and donuts second, this is totally fine because these are maps to the actual inputs of this function. So the order here does not matter. So that's really important. Also, again, if I had a function that took in 20 parameters, it's probably really easy for me to accidentally swap 2 parameters as I'm typing them in. But if you're using keyword arguments, you're just guaranteed you're going to map to the correct parameter, even if your ordering's out of order. So run this again. We still get yummy gross. Notice again, I swapped green beans and donuts, even though my function expects donuts to be first and green beans to be second. This is the whole point of keyword arguments. You don't have to worry about your ordering. You just got to know what you're mapping to. All right. So this operator will be a lifesaver, especially when dealing with CSV files, if you're using dictionary reader. So going back to our example here, we're getting a dictionary here. Let's say instead of creating just a dictionary, I want to create a class instance. So I'm going to change this here. I'm going to call NFL team. I'm going to use that spread operator. Why can I do this? The reason is because these values here map exactly to the headers here. That is very important. Those values, again, those keywords must match. If it doesn't, you're going to get an error. So if I go back to my quargs and I name this a little different, let's say I name this bagels instead of donuts. Normally, you can name your parameters whatever you want, and this is technically fine, but when you try to pass it an unmapped parameter, it's not going to have a value for bagels. So if I try running this, notice you got an unexpected keyword argument. So I pass it donuts equals something. Again, this line and this line are the same. Sorry for that comma. But yeah, so I'm passing it something called donuts, and it gets those functions like, I have no idea where you're trying to assign donuts to. So again, the naming must match. So again, going back to our NFL data, our header was ID, team, wins and losses. So for this to work correctly, my parameters inside my class had to be named exactly the same thing. If I do have that, then I could use this spread operator and create a NFL team instance. Is everyone with me? So again, this is, again, hopefully highlighting why I moved this function into my NFL team class, because I'm actually creating a bunch of instances from this class method using the data from the NFL.csv file. So I give this a run. Let's just review what we had. So data is basically just going to take all the data you return and print out X. But in this case, X is not a dictionary anymore. It's an NFL team object, kind of like the lines up here. So if I do that and run what I want to run, I got a cd into my CSV data. I do Python data.py. Okay, so notice I did screw something up. I don't know if you guys got that. That was totally accidental, but this highlights the exact thing I was trying to point out. Init method got an unexpected argument team. The reason being is in my class over here, I called it, I called it name, but my CSV file had it as team. So I goofed up there unintentionally, but I guess kind of serves a purpose. So this should be team, because I want the data to match. Technically, I can name this name though. This name does not have to match the value I'm assigning it. So I'm actually going to keep my internal value called name for now. It's going to cause problems later. But the parameter I'm passing it is team. So this is fine. You can name your variables whatever you want. But in this case, this team has to match my header, because my header, I'm using the spread operator, which is going to assign a team value. So let's give this a run again. All right, there we go. So we got the Patriots have 10 wins, Bears have 2, Jets have 5 wins for the season. Everyone kind of follow all that we went through. So we're creating an object now for each record. So we're taking in some data, converting it to an internal object of NFL team, which is much more beneficial than using a dictionary. Again, the stuff we talked about in the last lecture, we can still achieve our task with a dictionary, but classes give us that much more power and control over our data, more so than dictionaries would.
The parameter in line 7, is that referring to it being Is that another reference to it being a class method?
Yep. So glad you asked that. I definitely glazed over that. So for class methods, instead of a self parameter being passed in, we get a CLS value. This actually CLS value is this class. Much like when you have an instance, that self refers to that particular instance that's calling it. So technically, instead of calling NFL team here, I could actually just do CLS because this is the actual class that's being called here. So again, I changed this. If everyone caught that, I don't want to go too quickly. Instead of having NFL team there, I could just have CLS because CLS is pointing to this class. So if I run this, just to prove I have not broken my code, get the same thing. So yeah, the CLS, again, is your actual class. It's not a particular instance of your class. It is your class itself.
Ankur, could you
Yep.
make that line 6 into static method as well?
Static, yes, because there is a difference here. I think the difference here is I'm not using any class objects. So in this case, I would not pass it class. Yeah, so there's something called static methods also. Not to confuse you guys, for now we're just going to focus on class methods. So class methods do have access to class attributes. So theoretically, if I did want to use total games here, I could do something like, print class.total games, if I type this correctly. So in this case, if I did need, something class specific, that's why I would create a class method. But as Juan kind of asked about or mentioned, there is something called static methods, and those can be appropriate when you're not dealing with anything with the class. So in this case, if I didn't want to create a class here, and I didn't want to access any class data, static methods are for things that don't rely on your class at all. So in this case, I do want to use my class down here. So I'm going to make this a class method. Don't worry if you're not familiar with class methods or static methods. We're going to talk more about them going forward. But just kind of understand this has nothing to do with any particular instance. That's the whole point of being a class method rather than an instance method. Okay, let's take a break. We've been going about an hour strong. So let's take a 8-minute break. Let's reconvene at 2:15, and we're just going to cover writing out to CSV files, and that shouldn't take too long. And then from that, we'll get into pair programming for the afternoon.
Ankur, just a quick question. As we're taking a deeper dive, would it be possible to, since these lectures are being loaded on YouTube, if we could get access to these working files, just to kind of troubleshoot and practice and experiment ourselves, as we're if we rewatch the videos and etc.
Okay, I could definitely provide them. The only, I guess, part of the problem is I delete like half the stuff I type eventually. Like I deleted stuff from my data file, so it's not going to be easiest to follow. I would say just try coding along. If you're rewatching a lecture, you can always pause. I'll provide what I have if that's helpful. But I would say most of the time, it'd be better to work off your own files. Just get that practice and not have half written code. Because again, I'm deleting and adding as I'm going. I actually deleted a whole file here. I had default params as a file that I got rid of because it's causing me problems. But
yeah, no worries. I appreciate it though. Thank you.
Yep, nope, good request. All right, so yeah, let's take a 8-minute break. We'll be back in at 2:15, 2:16. All right, let's share my screen. All right, so we're just going to cover writing out to a CSV file. Again, it's almost as simple as reading from a CSV file, so nothing too crazy going on here. So let's say we want to add some extra data. So we could do it with the CSV writer, or we can use a dictionary writer. So we'll go through both examples. So again, CSV writer is just a little more manual work, especially if you have a class already. Dictionary writer will be a little easier to use, but let's use this example. So I'll copy that in actually. All right, so we have the stuff. All right, so we have CSV already imported. We have, let's see, I named myself a little differently. So mine's in a data folder and I called it NFL CSV. So in this case, we have mode equals W. So we want to write out to our NFL file. So So you have NFL writer, and we're adding the Giants. They're 6-4. Again, I'm not sure why the team win totals or game totals are different. But the Giants are 6-4, and Lions somehow are 8-2. I'm gonna actually make these values a little more sensible. Let's make it a 16-game season. So Giants will go 6-10. I'm gonna update these. Patriots will go 11-5. Bears will go say 4-12. And the Jets, well, they're the Jets, so they'll go, let's say they get 1 win in the season. We don't want to make the Jets feel too bad. All right, so we have 16 games for each team, just to make my life or my peace of mind a little better. All right, so we have the Lions and Giants, which we're adding in here. So we just call write row on the file, and that should write into it. But again, we need to make sure we're writing or appending. So let me make a backup of this. If we do a write, let's clear this out. Data. Okay. So I executed this file. There's nothing up in the output, so I'm not printing anything out. Let's look at our NFL file. Notice that we overwrote everything in here. That is not what I intended, as in, again, we're appending like team 4 and 5. Again, that's not, I guess, what I wanted, but if that's what you want, then you can totally write to it. In this case, I want to append to my existing file. I don't want to overwrite all that data. So if I copy back my original data, paste that in here. Now, instead of writing, I'm going to use a value of appending. So I'm going to write A for append. If I do this, give this a run, let's actually print something out just to have something. Say done. Up. Okay, we got done. So we should have written out to our NFL CSV file. If we look at it, notice we got Giants and Lions appended to the 3 existing teams that we had in there. So in this case, I didn't want to overwrite, so I appended. We have our header once, that's fine. And we're good to go. All right, so that was just this typical writer, but we also have dictionary writer, which can be helpful. So another comment that you guys might be thinking, would it make sense to put this into my NFL team class? I would say yes. It's similar to my class method here. Since I'm loading all my team data here and creating instances, I think it would make sense to also have a writer. So again, I'm just packaging everything up into this class so that it's easier for my caller of this function to reuse this code. So imagine, let's say I created my NFL team class, and then I handed this code off to Tim, because Tim's on my screen right now on Zoom. If he wanted to write off to the file, he would have to currently add this logic in here and write out manually. That's not as user-friendly as if I had a method already in my class so that he didn't have to rewrite this. Like, let's say I hand this to Tim and who else is on my screen here? I have Don. So if I give it to Tim and Don, sorry, Zoom's being a little difficult right now. If I give it to both Tim and Don, they're both gonna have to rewrite kind of this logic to open up the file and write out to it. That's not, again, it's not user-friendly. They're kind of redoing some of the work that I can kind of package into my class. So instead of doing this, let's copy this out. Let's create another class method. Class method. Don't forget your at decorator. And this will be, let's say, write teams to a file. I don't know how to quite name this. Okay, so now I'm gonna kind of bundle this into my NFL team class so that when I hand this off to Tim and Don, they can have, use this a little more easier, I guess, easier interface. So in this case, I'm gonna take in a list, let's say. So teams list. And then this would be a for loop. Everyone with me, hopefully. So I'm just changing my interface a little bit. So NFL writer will take in team. Let's see the list. This is going to be a list of lists.
I assume we're just going to decide there's no real value to having row numbers in this file.
Row numbers. I mean, they're IDs, so we're storing IDs in their file.
Okay, but then we'd have to have some way for Tim and I to determine IDs without duplicating them. That's a different day.
Yeah, I mean, let's just say you're working independently. We're not going to worry about colliding with IDs. All right, so we have our add teams list. It's probably poorly named, but we'll go with it. So now that I have this class method, when I hand it off to Tim and Don and whoever else, all they had to do is use that method here. So if I do NFL team dot, what did I call it? Write teams to file. So now here, they just got to provide the data, and they don't have to worry about the implementation of how to write it out. So we had, what was the data? We had the Giants. And then we had the Lions. All right, so they still had to supply the data. Like, I'm not just going to automatically write data for them. But in this case, once they have their data, they can just pass that to my function. And now, again, it's that idea of abstraction. I have a method called write teams to file. Tim and Don and whoever else is using my class, they could probably deduce what this function is doing just based on the name. And they can pass it data. And the data, this function will take care of it for them. So that, again, the idea of I'm giving them a black box, and it has the interface of being able to write teams and load teams, and they don't have to worry about the implementation of it. So again, when you're designing classes, try to bundle everything up, which makes sense in that class. So NFL team is kind of bundling the idea of extracting data from a file and writing out to a data from a file. Again, a lot of these are design decisions. Some of them make, like, there might not be necessarily 100% right or wrong way to do it. It's kind of what you think is a good design for what you're doing. So in this case, I provide a method. I hand this off to Tim. So Tim's going to add the Giants and Lions. So it's much easier for him to do it. He just provides the data, calls my method, and then he's good to go. So if I try this, let's see. All right, done. All right, I've appended it twice because I didn't erase the original data, but still got the job done. So let's simulate this again. Boom, got appended. All right, now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to use a dictionary writer. And the reason we want to do that is because since we're dealing with objects, or we should be dealing with objects, dictionary writer kind of makes it easier. So instead of having these items, let's just have, let's call it objects data, which will be similar, it'll be a list. But instead of having a list of lists, we're going to have objects. So we're going to create an NFL team. The NFL team will be ID 4. We'll have the Giants still, so it'll be the same data. They have, I guess I made this 6 and 10, and lines were 8 and 8. So 6 wins, 10 losses for the Giants. So I'm creating an actual object. Again, this is comparing against just having data that's kind of arbitrarily packaged together versus this is a better packaging for it. Because it's an actual NFL team that has, again, properties with it. So NFL team 5 will be the Lions, who went 8 and 8 for this particular season. All right, so now we actually have objects recreated. And so this is a list of NFL teams rather than a list of lists, right? You know, list of lists of lists can get really complicated. Having objects to deal with just makes it a little more easy. So in this case, data is going to be object data. I'm going to have to change my interface. So instead of writing out a list, I want to write out using a dictionary writer. So here I'll use dictionary writer. I'll still call it NFL writer. I'll call this team. And let's name this a little better. Okay, so now that I have team here, I need to convert this to a dictionary. But there's one more thing I need with a dictionary writer. I need to specify the headers. So this is, again, since we have key value pairs, the dictionary writer needs to know how to break that down. So in this case, I'm going to provide it headers. So we have ID, we had team, we had wins, and we had losses. Okay, so those are my headers. Right, let's go back to here. Dictionary writer, right row, same thing. Okay, so in this case, team is an object. It is not a dictionary object. So I want to convert it to a dictionary. So one way I could do that is by calling the dictionary dunner method. So this should convert it to a dictionary. And let's kind of see that in action. Okay, hopefully I coded this correctly. If not, we'll debug together. So I'm going to save that. So again, we converted our data to actual objects rather than just using lists and dictionaries. So we have two NFL team objects. We're passing that to our writing method. Let's see what happens. Of course, we get errors. So this is something I alluded to earlier when I was renaming stuff. Remember when I created this situation, my internal value is called name, but the CSV file is expecting team. So this broke down over here because this dictionary, if I see it printed out somewhere here, this dictionary I was printed out for the Giants has ID, name, wins and losses. Those are the keys for the dictionary coming from the class. But the CSV file needs team because it's trying to map it to this team header. So that's where naming comes into play also. So instead of using name here, I should probably just keep it consistent. So I switch that to team, switch this to team, save this. Let's try this again. Okay, there we go. So this is a dictionary representation of my class. That's what's being printed out on line 21 here, where I'm printing out that dictionary. Again, I have a team, that's an NFL team object. I'm calling the Dunder dictionary, I guess, attribute here, which gives me the representation of all the instance values here. And then I'm writing that dictionary using the dictionary writer and write row. Okay. Anyone lost on dictionary writer or anything that I did here?
So the right row, this is just write it out in a row, so it makes it easier to read. Is that the only purpose of it?
Yeah, so it adds a new row for each entry. So here I have duplicates because I ran this twice, ran this again. It adds an entry for each team.
In application, like, would you also include like a function within there to delete duplicate entries if you did run it more than once?
Yeah, so yeah, usually, yeah, you don't want to duplicate records. So the normal way you do this probably is you'd read it in. So let's actually go through that entire motion. So I'm going to get rid of this data. Let's do, let's call it team data equals NFL team dot load all teams. I don't know how to pass it anything. So that's going to read the file. Then for team data, yes, this is where I could add values. So do an append. But yeah, I mean, sorry, this is not going to answer your question directly, but yeah, you probably want some way to make sure you're not adding duplicates, especially for the ID. So this goes back to like databases. Databases will automatically handle the ID for you. So when you insert a new record, it'll give it a new ID. And so you had to figure out, okay, do I need ID 17 or ID 18? So again, another reason why databases are just better, a better method to persist data. Okay, so I can just append data. So I'm reading it in. Team data gets appended. So in this case, since I have my original team data, if I go back to my writing, I probably don't want to append because I'm using my existing data that I read from the file appended to it. So I want to rewrite that whole file. So I'd probably do a write there. But there's one thing that's going to be a problem here. Does anyone maybe quickly understand what might go wrong here?
Is this going to overwrite it?
It is going to overwrite it, which is what I want. Because in this case, I'm reading the data, getting the existing team data that's in the file. Then I'm appending to that data. And I just want to return, sorry, this was team data. I want to write my entire data of all the teams, the old ones and the new ones that I added. So I do want to overwrite my file so I don't have like the Patriots, the Bears, and the Jets kind of duplicated in there. But the problem with writing is I'm going to lose my header because the header is actually part of the file here. So if I just did a write right now, I'll get this data in here, but my header will get lost. So there's a method to do that. And let's simply NFL writer dot write header. So this will actually add this record as part of the output. Normally, this is just specifying for the internal use of dictionary writer what the headers are. But if you actually want to physically write it out, you call write header and that should dump it out. So if I run this, fingers crossed, I should probably, yeah, so we don't want giants or lines in here. All right, so if I run this, notice it appended it. It looked like it appended it. Basically, it rewrote the whole file though, because that's what we're doing with this W. All right, so the main takeaways from Dictionary Writer is it makes it easier when you're reading it in. You can use this double star operator to basically break down a dictionary into keyword arguments, and that makes it really easy to convert it to an object. So instead of doing it manually, it kind of just automatically does it for you, so long as your internal values and your parameters here match the headers of your CSV file. So there's some fragility to that if you misname something, or your CSV data changes without you expecting it to change. But yeah, when you're reading it out, you use a double star operator to break a dictionary down into keyword arguments, which makes it easier to create an object. That's what we're doing here. We're creating an actual NFL team object here with the CLS variable. When we write it out, we could just use the object and call __ dictionary and write that dictionary out to our file. So dictionary reader working with classes just makes it kind of a little more seamless rather than manually having to extract those values. So theoretically, I might have like 70 values here, then this is not going to change. These two will be the same. The only work I do is add those 70 values here and here. One more thing I could do, speaking about that, let's say I don't want to keep adding 70 values here. So let's say I need to add like a self dot, I don't know, location here. And then if I add a new value, I got to add it here. You can just pass quargs here, I believe. So if you do something like, I might need to double check this. So if I do something like data and data, I think this is kosher, but again, I will have to check it. This is team, wins, losses, and unfortunately, I don't have a location in my data, so let me comment that out. But now I changed my input to expect quargs, so I have to pass it quargs here. So let's see. Yeah, okay, so in this case, I would not call double star here. I'll just pass it a dictionary, and then I'll break that dictionary down here. I'm doing something wrong here, apologies. I guess I can just pass it a dictionary. That's one way to do it. To init, right. So now I can't use this interface if I change that. There was a way to do both. Sorry, I'm blanking on this right now. Well, let's go to the Googles. So you can pass it quarg like that. Interesting. All right, I'm gonna give this a try. So if I just pass it data like that, see if this works. So you call the dictionary on self, call update, and I've named mine data. Let's comment. Let's see. 15. Where's line 15? Here. Okay, I will not try to pursue this, but there's a way to kind of have it so that you can pass it quargs or positional arguments, I believe. All right, let's just forget the last 2 minutes. So keep it simple. Let's go with that. So you can break down a dictionary into individual components, and that can map. So again, if the ordering of this changed, this wouldn't this would be fine because again, those are keyword arguments. If I swapped, wins and losses here, nothing's going to change for that particular example. But in my original call here, these values are not keyword arguments. So in this case, I need to specify that that's wins and that's losses. You probably want to do that for all my values here. Location not defined. Okay, sorry, last 5 minutes probably got out of off track, but main takeaway, you can use the spread operator to break down a dictionary into keyword arguments, and then you can use the underscore dict to convert a class to dictionary values. All right, with that, any questions on reading or writing the CSV files?
I have a question, Ankur.
Go for it.
So according to where you were running the class methods, you said that was more of kind of like a design kind of preference, right? In your experience, like just as like a developer and everything like that, is it kind of difficult? Is that like kind of standard that we should kind of expect that, or is it just kind of depend like company to company, kind of what kind of people are on your team and like how they kind of design?
I would say again, there's always a 100% answer. I would argue that this is more proper because, again, going back to the example, let's say I'm handing this code off to you, Kyle. It's easier for you to just call a method here rather than for you to have to do this yourself, right? You could totally write this yourself, but that's not good design on my part because I developed something that's not self-reliant, if that kind of makes sense. Like I should have all the logic that the NFL team class is concerned with kind of nested in here so that it's less work for you or anyone else I hand it off to. So let's say I hand it off to 50 people. Instead of those 50 people having to re-implement writing out to a file, I should have that baked into my class because that's functionality that I expect people to reuse. So
yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess I was just asking like if we should consider that like a good standard to kind of uphold. I mean, have you encountered other instances where it's not that case, like when you were working at Wolverine or something like that with some of the
right? It's hard for me to answer because again, I didn't use Python in my previous role, but I'd say it again, OOP design wise, try to package stuff up so that everything is easy to use. So I know that's a generic answer, so I apologize, but just again, think about if you're handing this off to someone else, what would they want? Would they prefer to have methods nested in there, or would they rather define it themselves? I guess it's for me, I could not have this as a class method and maybe pull this out. The only problem with that is instead of using this class parameter, now I got to explicitly say NFL team. And this kind of highlights why this is a class method, because it shouldn't matter what this class is. This class, like the class method takes care of that rather than in this case, I need to know I'm passing an NFL team. Small distinction there, but again, since this is creating NFL team objects and this is breaking down NFL team objects, to me, it makes sense to have these as class methods just because it's, functionality that I expect people to use for my class.
Oh, good deal. Thank you.
Good question. Good question. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording.